The Knights Templar, where faith and economics met in history from service to system, a story of devotion Episode 1. A journey into the depths of history. Welcome to a journey that stretches from the spiritual atmosphere of Jerusalem to the historic squares of Europe. Today, we will explore one of the most talked about groups in history, the Knights Templar. But we will not look at them only as a military order. We will examine them as an organization where faith, service, discipline, and economic intelligence came together in a remarkable way. How did a mission that began with 9 devout knights protecting pilgrims become the foundation of an international network of trust? How did a group built around service and loyalty become connected to systems of money, credit, and financial power? This is not only a story of swords and shields. It is also the story of how money and trust can become powerful tools in the hands of those who know how to use them. What we will discuss is based on historical records and documented accounts. Our goal is not to glorify anyone, and it is not to condemn anyone. When it comes to the Knights Templar, fact and legend are so deeply intertwined that the real challenge is to carefully untangle them. Step by step, we will explore how a person could leave their gold in London, and months later, access its value in Jerusalem. We will see how a system powerful enough to make kings line up for loans actually worked. And together, we will reopen those sealed ledgers that have been buried for centuries in the dusty shelves of history. So, if you are ready, we are going back 900 years to a story of loyalty, faith, service, and a legacy that helped shape history. Episode 2. A search for security in an age of uncertainty. If you looked at Europe toward the end of the 11th century, you would not see the organized nation-states we know today. The political landscape was fragmented and unstable. Kings, local lords, bishops, and regional powers all had their own rules, and in many places, even their own currencies. The economy was still largely based on land, but trade was slowly beginning to grow. In the middle of this disorder, in 1095, a call from the Pope changed the course of history. The age of the Crusades had begun. Jerusalem had been captured, but the roads leading to the Holy Land were dangerous and unpredictable. If you were a pilgrim traveling from Europe to Jerusalem, you had to face far more than a long journey. There were bandits on the roads, pirates at sea, disease, harsh geography, and political authorities that changed from one region to the next. For people of that time, this journey was not just a physical trip, it was also a deep spiritual search. Reaching the destination could take months. Poor security, difficult terrain, and the dangers of travel made pilgrimage an extremely demanding act of faith. And if you carried even a small amount of gold with you, it was almost like walking with a target on your back. People wanted to protect not only their lives, but also their possessions. They needed someone they could trust. But who could that be? This is where the Templars entered the stage. They were not simply warriors with swords in their hands. They were also a disciplined organization with a reputation for order, reliability, and trust. Episode 3. A story of discipline and devotion. The year was 1119. A French nobleman named Hugh de Payens, together with his famous group of 8 companions, dedicated himself to protecting those who traveled along the sacred road to Jerusalem. For them, this mission was more than a profession. It was a spiritual service. In their early years, they lived with remarkable simplicity. Their seal even showed 2 knights riding on the same horse. This image came to represent their brotherhood, their solidarity, and their intention to stay away from personal wealth. But that image of poverty could be misleading. Behind it stood an extraordinary level of discipline. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem gave them a place on the Temple Mount, in an area traditionally associated with the remains of Solomon's Temple. Their name came from this location. They became known as the Knights Templar. What set them apart were their famous vows: poverty, obedience, and chastity. A Templar knight was not supposed to own personal property. In spirit, he possessed almost nothing beyond the simplest necessities of life and the tools of his duty. But this personal poverty opened the door to institutional wealth. With the support of the church and influential figures such as Bernard of Clairvaux, the Templars gained powerful recognition from the Pope in 1139. From that point on, they enjoyed a level of independence that was almost unheard of in medieval Europe. In many matters, they answered directly to the Pope. They received broad exemptions from local taxes. They were not easily subject to the authority of local rulers or courts. This made them something extraordinary for their time, an organization with its own armed force, wide legal privileges, international reach, and very limited dependence on kings or local powers. In today's terms, it was one of the greatest forms of institutional freedom any organization could hope to have. Episode 4. The birth of a medieval powerhouse. The commanderies. So how did men who personally took a vow of poverty become so wealthy? The answer lies in the economy of donations. Noble families wanted to support the struggle in the Holy Land, and many donated some of their most valuable lands and properties to the Templars. From England to France and beyond, the banner of the Knights Templar began to appear across Europe. But the Templars did not simply hold on to these assets and let them sit unused. In many ways, they became some of the most effective administrators of the Middle Ages. Across Europe, they built a vast network of centers known as commanderies. These commanderies were more than religious houses. They were also carefully managed administrative hubs. On their lands, the Templars developed large agricultural operations. They ran mills, produced wine, managed livestock, and in some cases even built fleets of ships that allowed them to take part in Mediterranean trade. Each Templar house in Europe functioned, in a loose sense, almost like a local branch of a larger financial and logistical network. They could sell agricultural surplus in one region, convert it into cash, and then move that value toward the east, where their mission continued. So what we are looking at is not just a group of warriors. We are looking at an organization that managed logistics, supply chains, land, money, and transportation with impressive discipline. In modern terms, it looked almost like an early form of a vertically integrated international enterprise. Of course, it was not a corporation in the modern sense, but for the medieval world, the scale and efficiency of the Templar network were extraordinary. Episode 5, A Financial Breakthrough. An early check-like system. Now we come to one of the most fascinating parts of the Templar story: their financial innovations. In the medieval world, moving money was not simple. Transferring wealth often meant carrying heavy bags of gold or silver coins on horseback, across dangerous roads, through regions filled with bandits, political instability, and uncertainty. It could take months, and there was always a real chance that the money would never arrive. The Templars helped reduce that risk with something surprisingly simple: a written document. They developed one of the early systems that resembled modern money transfers. Here is how it worked. Imagine you were a merchant from Paris, preparing to travel to Jerusalem. Instead of carrying all your gold with you, you could deposit it at a Templar house in Paris. In return, the Templars would give you a document marked with seals, codes, or identifying details that only their network could properly verify. Then, after a long and difficult journey, once you reached Jerusalem, you could go to the Templar house there, present the document, and receive the value of your deposit. The most striking part is how advanced this idea was for its time. In an age when communication was slow, travel was dangerous, and literacy was far from universal, the Templars created a trusted system that allowed value to move without physically moving all the gold. If the document was stolen on the road, it would not automatically be useful to the thief. The value was connected to identity, verification, and the internal records of the Templar network. In a loose modern comparison, it worked a little like an early check system, or even a distant ancestor of personalized banking tools. Of course, it was not a debit card or a bank transfer in the way we understand those things today. But for the medieval world, it was a remarkable solution. With parchment, seals, records, and trust, the Templars helped create one of the early financial systems that made long-distance transactions safer, faster, and far more practical. Episode 6, Economic Solutions Within a Spiritual Framework. So how was this system made compatible with religious principles? In the medieval Christian world, charging interest was often viewed with suspicion by the church and by society. Lending money for profit could be morally controversial. But the Templars found ways to make their financial services sustainable while staying within the accepted religious and legal boundaries of their time. Instead of presenting these charges as interest, they often framed them as service fees, transportation costs, administrative expenses, or exchange related costs. In simple terms, their argument was this: we are not charging interest. We are charging for the cost of protecting, moving, recording, and managing your money. They also used arrangements that resembled rent or income management. In some cases, property could be pledged, and the income from that property could be used as part of the financial arrangement. Centuries before modern banks spoke of processing fees or administrative charges, the Templars had already helped organize similar ideas into a structured system. Because of this combination of trust, discipline, and financial intelligence, it was not only pilgrims who relied on them, kings did as well. At one point, the French royal treasury was kept in the temple in Paris. This shows just how much confidence powerful rulers placed in the order. By this stage, the Templars were no longer only protectors of pilgrims or warriors in the Holy Land. They had become treasurers, record keepers, and trusted financial agents for some of the most powerful figures in Europe. Their careful records and disciplined accounting practices stood out in an age when financial administration was often inconsistent and fragmented. For the Templars, trust became more than a moral value. It became a form of capital, and in many ways, that trust was even more powerful than gold. Episode 7: Shifting Powers and New Challenges. But history teaches us one rule that rarely changes. If you lend someone a great deal of money, that person may become your closest friend. But if the debt becomes too large to repay, the debtor can become your greatest enemy. The Templars found themselves caught in the middle of this dangerous balance. By the 13th century, their power had reached a level that made many rulers uneasy. They had acquired territories, built strongholds, developed maritime connections, and operated across the Mediterranean with their own ships. They were present in political negotiations, financial arrangements, and diplomatic efforts throughout Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. Their influence was no longer limited to protecting pilgrims. Then, in 1291, everything changed. The city of Acre fell. With the fall of Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land was lost. Christians were forced to withdraw from the region, and the original mission of the Templars, protecting pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem, effectively came to an end. This created a serious question: what would become of a military order whose main battlefield had disappeared? Now, in the heart of Europe, there remained an armed organization with vast lands, legal privileges, tax exemptions, financial records, and perhaps most importantly, the debts and promises of kings. For rulers who were trying to strengthen central authority, this was deeply uncomfortable. And for monarchs whose treasuries had been drained by war, it was more than uncomfortable. It was dangerous. No ruler felt this pressure more sharply than King Philip IV of France. Episode 8: A Tragic End. The operation of 1307. King Philip IV of France was under enormous financial pressure because of his wars, and his debts to the Templars had become extremely heavy. For the king, the fastest way to escape the debt was not to repay the creditor. It was to destroy the creditor. To achieve this, he launched one of the most dramatic political campaigns of the Middle Ages. On the famous morning of Friday, October 13th, 1307, sealed orders were opened across France at the same time. The command was clear: arrest all Templars. Some later traditions have connected this event with the idea that Friday the 13th is unlucky, although historians still debate how strong that connection really is. Across France, Templars were seized, taken from their houses, and thrown into prison. The king then brought forward a series of severe accusations in order to justify the arrests. Many of the confessions that followed were obtained under pressure, and in some cases under torture. For that reason, modern historians treat these accusations with great caution. Today, many scholars argue that the deeper reasons behind the campaign were political and financial: to weaken an independent military order, erase royal debts, and seize the wealth and property of the Templars. Pope Clement V eventually gave in to the growing pressure. In 1312, the order was officially dissolved. It was a tragic turning point. A community that had begun with vows of faith, service, and protection had now become a victim of royal ambition, political fear, and financial desperation. Episode 9: The Curse of the Last Grand Master and the True Legacy. The story came to an end in 1314, on an island in Paris. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templar Order, was executed after declaring that he and his brothers had been treated unjustly. According to legend, as he faced death, Molay called those responsible for his execution to appear before divine judgment within a year. The chilling part is that both Pope Clement V and King Philip IV of France did, in fact, die before that year was over. This coincidence made the mystery surrounding the Templars even deeper. But the true legacy of the order does not live in legends. It lives in the financial world around us. After the Templars disappeared, part of their vast wealth was seized, and part of it was transferred to other religious orders. Yet the legend of the lost Templar treasure never truly faded, but perhaps the real treasure was not hidden in a secret vault. Perhaps it was hidden in the financial ideas they helped develop. Today, when you withdraw money from an ATM, send an international transfer from your phone, or trust the invisible system behind your credit card, you are, in a distant way, following the path once opened by those mounted knights carrying sealed documents across dangerous roads. The Templars proved something powerful to the world. Trust can become a system. Records can become protection, and a disciplined financial network can become stronger than gold itself. Episode 10. Conclusion and final reflections. The story of the Knights Templar is one of the most complex, and at the same time, one of the most instructive chapters in human history. To understand them only as warriors would be to miss the larger picture. They were also builders of systems, and when we look at them from that perspective, history becomes much broader and much more revealing. Throughout this series, we have seen how men who set out in the name of faith and service became part of a structure that deeply influenced economic life. A journey that began with swords eventually ended with ledgers, debts, and political collapse. But the Templars left behind a lasting lesson: money only works when there is trust behind it. And when that trust is broken, neither swords nor castles are enough to protect the system. In this video, we explored how a story of devotion was shaped by discipline, success, power, suspicion, and finally, a tragic end. History reminds us that names, kingdoms, and institutions may change, but systems built on honesty, records, and trust continue to shape the world long after their founders are gone. So what lessons can we draw from this historical experience for today's world? How similar was the Templar financial network to modern banking? And what does their rise and fall teach us about power, debt, and trust? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy deep, respectful, and carefully researched historical explorations like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In the next episode, we will meet again on another mysterious page of history. Until then, stay curious and stay with history.